Thanks, Julia and Vanessa. First and foremost, guys, we want to appreciate you all from joining. We understand that this has been a little bit of a frustrating time as well as concerning time for many of you as you have tried to navigate the late liquidation extension opportunity. So we are currently going to talk with you the revised ARP ESSER and ARP Homeless liquidation extension request process. We are going live with that today. When we started to craft this process, we tried our best to reuse the instrument that you all provided to us during the first opportunity that you all had to submit for liquidation extensions. And so you will find that there is a lot of the same information as well as new requirements from the U.S. Department of Education. So first and foremost, just the disclaimer around generative AI tools, making sure that you all are aware that we do not allow those during our presentations and that we will block tools from meetings as well as ask members to leave. So during today's webinar, we're going to talk through a few different sections. So our agenda includes the ed guidance that has been released as of date. Julia is going to spend some time talking through the revised liquidation extension request. We're going to have common questions, and then we're going to have some opportunity for closing remarks as well as resources. So first and foremost, we want to start with how did we get here? So on March 28th, the U.S. Department of Education released a letter announcing the reconsideration of all the requests that had been submitted across the country. So as you all are aware, we received our approval letter in mid-February, and we were able to start taking late liquidation requests from our districts. Well, on March 28th at 5 p.m., we were informed that Ed had modified their decision on the liquidation extension periods and that they would no longer accept any late liquidation extension requests from any states. And so we have met numerous times with the U.S. Department of Education as well as national partners to find out more information as well as seek clarification to ensure that we have the information that we need to get from each of our grantees to expedite the reconsidering of their late liquidation request. And so today we are going to be launching the new revised process in ePlan. This process will mirror some parts of the late liquidation that you all submitted previously. We have worked with our vendor to ensure that there are sections that you all are able to actually copy forward. You do not necessarily have to resubmit all of the same documentation. So we really wanted to make this as less burdensome as we could on you all, since you all had already done a lot of the heavy lift when you asked for late liquidation previously. So I'm going to turn it over to Julia Hudson to talk through a little bit what this revised extension period request process is going to look like in ePlan. Julia?
Thank you. Okay, so Debbie mentioned already, we have gone live with this morning. So if you would like to follow along, you can go into ePlan and access the instrument now. One thing to note is that previously the requests were under 2025. They are now in 2026. So when you go to ePlan to data and information, you'll go to fiscal year 2026. And from there, you should be able to see the ARP ESSER liquidation extension request or the ARP Homeless, depending on which one you are reapplying for, or both. Those are both in there, and we'll go through the instrument. They essentially look pretty much the same, both of those. There are a few differences that we'll talk about, but most of this is going to apply to both of those tools. So once you are in the instrument, of course, you'll always click draft started. That is sometimes very easy to forget, but make sure to click that draft started so that you can go ahead and begin making changes. And then you'll go into the cover page, which is also one that sometimes is easy to forget. So making sure that you complete all of those sections and to ensure that all of the contacts that you put in, it's usually your director of schools, your ESSER point of contact, your homeless point of contact, that those are correct, because when we do send out information, those will be the people receiving it. So we need to make sure that we have the correct contacts for that. You'll next go to the overview and attestation page, and this is exactly like what was in there previously. So there's a couple of assurances that you'll need to read through, make sure that you are meeting, and click those before you move on. Then we come to the funding section, and that's really the meat of the instrument. So if you remember from previously, this is where you're going to put most of your information, what you're requesting, why, how much, all of those things. So there are some additional things that will need to be done, and we'll go through each of these kind of step by step. You can see as well, if you're in their instrument following along, where these are. So the first thing that's new here is you're going to choose between 3 options. So the first one is you're going to check the box if you do not want to apply again. So even if you have decided we're not going to reapply for extension, you can do that. That is an option. However, you do have to go in, complete the cover page, and check this to let us know that you are not reapplying. After that, you'll submit and you'll complete a release of funds form for any of your remaining funds. So whether it's 20 cents or $200, whatever it may be, if you're not going to reapply for an extension, you will need to go to the release of funds form, which is also under data and information, and complete that so that we can revert those funds back. Now, if you are planning to reapply, you have a couple options here as well. So Debbie mentioned already that you can choose to reapply with the information that you had previously. And we'll show you how that needs to be done, because there is some additional information you'll have to add. So you have the choice of resubmitting with the additional required information. So you're not making changes to your projects. You want to reapply for the same things that you had previously, or you want to reapply, but maybe you want to make changes. And that is an option. You do not necessarily have to reapply for the same projects. You can make changes here, and we'll talk about what that looks like in just a second. And with both of those, there is going to be additional information that you'll have to complete in order to complete the request. So if you are submitting a previously approved project, you have selected, yes, we want to resubmit our original projects and complete the additional information that is needed. What you will do first is you can copy over your information from the previous fiscal year. So you'll see in the instrument, there's a place where it says copy previous fiscal year details. And from there, it will copy over everything that you had in your previous request. There is going to be some additional information that you will have to add once that is copied over. And that is all highlighted below. This is also linked in the email that we received on April 3rd that went through all of the others, all of the other requirements that are now needed. So you'll see these. You can go to that email and see the list. And we tried to make sure that we were very clear in making sure that all of that was included. So regardless of if you are adding new projects or you're just submitting what you wanted in the first place, you're copying that over, you will have to complete this additional information. And that is all going to be noted in red within the instrument. So you should be able to see very clearly what is new. You will need to put your amount liquidated as of March 28th, because that is when we received the notification that these were being reconsidered. So if you remember previously, you had to put what was liquidated as of September 30th. You will have that information, and that should copy over if you had that in your previous request. However, you will now also have to put what was liquidated as of March 28th. And that could be different if you received reimbursements in that time period. Some LEAs did. If you did not, it may be the same amount. I believe with ARP Homeless, and Vanessa may want to jump in and make sure I'm telling you correctly, because ARP Homeless was not approved as early as the ARP ESSER liquidation extension. I don't believe any LEAs had received reimbursement. So your amount liquidated is probably going to be the same as it was previously. Is that right, Vanessa?
That is correct.
Okay.
Also, Julia, there is someone put in the chat that there is 20 other people waiting in another meeting link. Do you know which other meeting link they could be talking about? Could it be your office hours? It may hop over and check.
It's probably office hours.
Okay, I'll hop over there and check that out, and I'll be back shortly.
Yeah, I believe those were both linked in the email invitation. So that is probably what it is. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be right back.
So to find this amount liquidated, you will go into your reimbursement request for 2025 and subtract from your net available amount so that you can see what has actually been liquidated as of that March 28th date. You will then include your total amount that is being requested for your revised late liquidation, and that, of course, may be different than what you had previously. And then it will auto-calculate if there is an amount to be released, what that is. So perhaps you're not choosing to use all of your remaining funds. You're going to release part of those. This will auto-calculate that for you. You'll also need to include vendor names. So if you're contracting for, say, tutoring services, you'll need to make sure those vendor names are included. You need to provide a justification of why ED should exercise its discretion to grant the request, as well as a brief description of how each project's extension is necessary to mitigate the effects of COVID on a student's education. And that's going to be for each project listed. And then you'll need to provide an extension deadline. What is the date you want that to be completed by? We know that these requests may be approved up through March of 2026, but ED has really encouraged LEAs to consider what is a realistic timeline and what will align with the services that are being provided. So we know that it's possible to get approved for that length of time. However, we want to be realistic about it and make sure that we're not extending just for the sake of extending. Okay. Moving on. So with capital projects, you will have to complete some additional information. And this goes for if you had a capital project that was previously approved, or if you're adding a new capital project, you will need to complete this information regardless of that. So you will be asked at the bottom of the page, at the bottom of the instrument, if you had any capital projects that are listed above. You will check the box, and then you will need to complete these 3 sections for each of those projects. So you will put the location and a brief description, the percentage that has been completed, and then an explanation of that percentage complete status. These always require a little more justification. So we'll need to make sure that we're including all of that information and that this is going for whether that project was approved previously or whether it is new. You'll still have to make sure that we're giving the appropriate justification for those. This is one, of course, that is not in the ARP Homeless, so you will not see this requirement there. However, it is in the ARP ESSER because we had a lot of capital projects, as we know, with that ESSER 3 money. Now, if you are opting to include new projects, then when you go into your extension, you will copy over your previous fiscal year details, just as you did if you're not making any changes. Copy those over, then you can start making changes. If you have new projects, there is a section where you will need to select that it is new, it has not been copied forward, because there are going to be some additional things needed if it is a newly requested project. And then you'll have to complete all the sections. So new projects, of course, we know there's nothing copied forward. You'll have to complete all those additional sections that you completed previously for any new projects that you are requesting. You can add rows, of course, as you could in the previous instrument. This goes under the capital project section as well for your justification. Any of those, you can add an additional row here, and making sure that we thoroughly complete all of these sections. Ed has stated that this is going to be approved on an individual project specific basis. So we want to make sure that we're providing all the information that is needed so that we can hopefully get approval for each of these projects. For your supporting documentation, for each project, there's a box that asks, has supporting documentation been uploaded? I believe when you copy over your information from FY25 that box should be checked because you had to upload documentation at that point. If it is not, you'll just need to make sure that you're checking that box on the previous request. However, if it is a new request, you will have to upload additional information. So we have all the documentation from the previous request. If it is something that was already requested, we have that. So you don't have to upload additional information for those projects. However, any new project will require that supporting documentation. And there is a box to check as well to make sure that we're getting all of these things included. Just noting that you have new projects and that you have uploaded your supporting documents. And those could be things like purchase orders, contracts for services, other documentations that support the delay in receiving services, and making sure that those documents are clearly labeled, they're legible, and that everything corresponds correctly to the projects you are requesting extension for. And this is just to make sure that we are meeting that obligation date and that we have justification for why an extension is needed for each of these. And then finally, submission. So once you have made sure that all of those sections are complete, all of your information has been input, and all of your documentation is uploaded, you will then move on to changing that status to draft completed and going through the process that all the appropriate personnel in your LEA have reviewed it and approved it. As you know, we do not get a notification that it is ready until it is LEA authorized, representative approved. Sometimes it's easy to forget that, and it may just be sitting, waiting for someone to approve it. So making sure that all of that is completed, that we have that done, and then we get the notification so that we can start reviewing those as they come in. We're going to go through some common questions that we have started receiving. I'm going to hand it back to Debbie to walk us through some of these.
Thanks, Julia, and thanks so much for streamlining the process so folks aren't required to have to re-enter a lot of the information we already compiled from them. Really appreciate your forward thinking there as we continue to work through this new process that Ed has requested of us and all of our grantees. And as Julia mentioned, we have On the next few slides, some common questions that we've started to receive from the field, as well as we've heard from other partners as we've been on with USAID and national partners who have assisted us in thinking through how we should resubmit some of these requests. So first and foremost, can LEAs submit their own request to ED? And so the U.S. Department of Education requires that the SEA, which is the Tennessee Department of Education, review all of the requests and send them for approval to ED. And the department has to make the request. We are kind of that first line of review prior to it being able to be submitted. And so we will be capturing all of this information and submitting it on our LEA's behalf, similar to what we did that first time when we asked for extension to be liquidated and received that approval. And so when can an LEA start submitting their request? So as Julia mentioned, the instrument and e-plan is open. We opened it today on April 15th, and we will be asking that everyone submit their first submission to us no later than May 30th. Now, I will be completely honest, and we will allow as many resubmissions as a district needs to be able to get approval to liquidate their funds. But we do want to submit these on a rolling basis to the U.S. Department of Education. And so by us having a timeline and allowing you all to submit up until May 30th for that first submission, we are able to ensure that we're pulling the information, providing it to ED weekly, and that we are continuing to push forward for our districts the ability for them to have access to these funds and liquidate. Also, I think it's important to note that some of our districts are in different financial situations, and we want to ensure that you all have the flexibility to submit, and we're able to expedite those districts that are ready to request an additional extension to liquidate. So does approval from the department guarantee approval from ED? No, and as earlier when we went through this process, it's important to note that we are kind of that first level of approval, but the final authority rests with the Secretary of Education. And so we have heard loud and clear that the Secretary of Education will be also involved in spot checking some of these requests and making sure that they are project based, that they are on some of those fundamental pieces that she's hoping to see this money being used for around learning recovery, especially tutoring and some of those. So just keep in mind, just because our team approves it and sends it to ED, that does not necessarily guarantee that the secretary will also approve it. The next question, are there some projects that are more likely to be approved than others? So we've heard loud and clear from USAID on webinars that projects that directly tie to student achievement in tutoring are what they would prefer to see. And that's not saying that if you have projects such as HVAC or capital projects, that they're not going to consider those, but they have spoke in favor of projects that affect student learning and achievement. Next slide, please. So another question that we've received from the field has been around already submitted requests for reimbursement from the department that have not received it. So as I mentioned earlier, on March 28th, we received a letter at around 5 p.m. that the U.S. Department of Education was no longer reimbursing states based on the formal approval of the former team at the agency. And so we had to also stop the request for reimbursement to our districts. And so if you have not received a reimbursement for something that services has been rendered and it was not requested and had not been paid out by that March 28th deadline, then we ask that you first submit that updated extension request to us and resubmit it. And then once we get the decision from the U.S. Department of Education, then we will be able to then ask you to complete a reimbursement request. And so even though there have been districts who maybe have had tutoring, instructional supports and things similar to that approved previously, we are all starting back at square one and gaining approval again on all of our activities prior to the Tennessee Department of Education being able to reimburse any of our stakeholders. Next, our LEA has a reimbursement request accepted and paid by the department. How do we know if the department requested reimbursements from ED for those expenditures? So all ARP ESSER reimbursement requests submitted between March 4th and March 28th have been paid and submitted to ED. Those do not need to reapply. So if you had a reimbursement request between March 4th and March 28th, and you received your funds from us, then you do not need to reapply for any of those activities. All ARP Homeless requests must be resubmitted. None of those were paid out during that time frame, and so we are requiring all ARP Homeless requests to be resubmitted, and then we'll be submitting those up to the U.S. Department of Education. So a couple folks have expressed concern around some of their previously approved projects and what happens if they don't get pre-approved. So maybe it's something, construction capital projects or something that they feel like may not be approved. And so we are encouraging districts to resubmit what they previously submitted. So you don't know until you try. And so we are recommending that districts consider just resubmitting what we originally had asked for approval for. But if something is kicked back from the U.S. Department of Education, then our team will work with you to ensure that you are able to reapply for the same project, or if you wish to move expenditures from one funding source to another, our team, as well as Mary Ann Dursky's team, will be partnering with districts to ensure that we're able to move funding sources around to ensure that you all are able to liquidate as much funds as US Ed will approve. So keep in mind, just because maybe every project isn't approved the first time, that doesn't mean we're going to stop trying. We will continue to work with districts on their behalf to go ahead and resubmit, as well as start looking for potentially other activities or expenditures that they would like to see moved to ESSER instead of maybe some of the other funds that they've used in the past. Another question we received is, would you like to request an extension for just a portion of our remaining funds and return the rest? So potentially maybe there are a few pieces that are things that maybe they don't want to seek late liquidation for, or maybe they think will be a little bit more of a burden or troublesome to get approved. Yes, LEAs can change the amount that they would like to seek liquidation for. And so you don't necessarily have to ask for every project or every activity that you had asked previously for. Districts do have the flexibility to change, the amount that they would like to seek an extension to liquidate for. Again, as Julia mentioned earlier, you may choose not to move forward and liquidate any of the funds. So that is also an option. So I'm going to toss it over back to Julia to kind of round out this presentation, and then we'll have Q&A. But I do want to say for folks who joined a little bit later, we did record this. And so if you would like to go back and hear just the beginning and some of the sections you may have missed, but Julia will also have office hours tomorrow, so we will be able to answer those questions. Julia?
Thank you. So all of the links within the instrument that we mentioned are now live and in TDOE resources. You'll go to that relief funding section in TDOE resources, and from there, there's an ARP ESSER liquidation extension request section. If you click on that, there is now a revise section within that. And so that is where you can find these slides. They are already posted. We have a new FAQ that has some of those questions that we've already gone over, as well as some additional questions. There are instructions for how to specifically go through the instrument and what needs to be included, as well as all of the information that we have received from Ed. That is all linked there. So you can go to that and find those resources. And then, of course, Jerry Beth is not with us today, but if you're not sure who your coordinator is, it's myself or Jerry Beth for ESSER. And so you can reach out to either one of us. We will get you to the right person and make sure that you get any help that you need, as well as Vanessa for ARP Homeless. Her information is listed here as well. So if you need to contact any of us, feel free to email us and ask any questions. We're happy to help. We know this has been a confusing time, so we want to make sure we're here to help as much as possible. And as always, if you believe there has been fraud, waste, or abuse, you are encouraged to report that. And please make sure that you share your feedback. You can use this QR code to take a quick survey. It's always helpful for us to know how we can improve, what we've done well, what we need to work on, so that we can make sure we're doing the best we can. And now we will have time for some questions. I know there are some questions in the chat about the instruments. I'm going to have to go into the instrument to play around a little bit to make sure I'm answering correctly. But we'll scroll back through and see what questions we have. Okay. Yes, I believe this question was already answered, but if you have already received reimbursement for all of your funds, you don't have remaining funds, you've received everything from the state, you don't have to reapply. If there are projects, I believe someone asked a question about a project that they completed and had received reimbursement. Do we delete that project from the new application or add it to the capital project section? If it is completed and you have received reimbursement for it, you don't have to reapply for that project because it's done and you have received your reimbursement. So this is really, anything that still needs to be liquidated. So you will not have to include that. And feel free, Debbie or Vanessa, to correct me if I'm wrong on anything. But yeah, you don't have to include that if it's already completed and been reimbursed. Let's see. Okay. So this question, and this may help, I think some people had some questions about the amount liquidated as of 9/30 and the amount liquidated as of 3/28. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a minute and go into the instrument so that I can make sure I'm telling you correctly. But those are they're calculating separately. So you'll carry over, it should carry over what you had previously put in for that amount liquidated as of 9/30. So you don't have to change that. You'll need to enter what has been liquidated as of 3/28. And so that's not going to be a difference between 9/30 and 3/28. It's just what is the total you have liquidated as of 3/28. So if you got any additional reimbursements in that time period, then you will have liquidated more money, obviously. So as you go in, let me make sure I get over here before I time out. I think it's too late for me. As you go in, you will look at what has been liquidated up to that point in total. And then it should calculate what is to be released. If there is anything to be released, you'll put in your total amount that you're requesting, and then that will calculate for you. And then you can find that, I believe. Make sure.
Julia, I'm almost signed in. If you want to give me just a second.
Okay. Thank you. I see somebody said that. I think that answers. Yes. Yeah, you're entering everything that has been liquidated. That's right. Mm-hmm. And you should be able to, if you go into your 2025 reimbursement request, you'll subtract the net available amount from your total allocation. I will put this in the chat, but this is also in the slides as well. So you'll have access to this. Yeah. So it's a separate calculation. So it's going to take that amount and subtract it from what your allocation was, your total allocation, and then what you have remaining for that.
Okay, I'm there, Julia. Do you want me to share my screen?
Oh, thank you. Yes. Mine is spinning, so it may be a minute for me. And I just put that in the chat. Excuse the, I don't know why it pasted such huge font, but easier for all of us to read. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Vanessa. So you see, if you copy over your previous fiscal year details from FY25, these that are in gray, amount obligated and liquidated, those should copy over for you. So ideally, you should not have to be entering those again. It should just be what was in there previously. So you're just going to put what has been liquidated up to this point. Now, like with ARP Homeless, Vanessa mentioned that it's probably going to be the same because that was not approved. And so I don't think anybody had any reimbursements received. With ARP ESSER, it may be different because you may have received some reimbursements, but you still have some left to liquidate. So that amount may be different, but it should calculate for you. So yeah, you can see if you go in, it'll ask you when you copy that over, if you want to keep your changes, and then you can start entering that new information. It will have the balance as whatever the balance was previously, or excuse me, as whatever your allocation was, because this is a separate calculation. So because that amount liquidated has not been put in yet, it's not going to calculate until that's entered. Yeah, I don't see any more questions. I may have missed one, so. Oh, someone asked about the drop down for save and move to the next page. So I believe if you go, yeah, it should say save and go to. Are you seeing that, Sullivan County? Is that showing up? I don't know. Yeah, so it should pop up for you which section, or if you want to go to the next page or previous page. I haven't had any issues with that showing up. So if you're not seeing
to hit draft started.
Yes. That is easy to forget. I get a lot of questions about that. So yes. Someone asked if some of the projects are completed and fully reimbursed, do you delete those? Yes. So if you are copying over from FY25 and there are projects that are done, you have been reimbursed fully for those, and you're not going to request those again, you can remove those when they copy over. Excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. And if you are requesting, if you're requesting new projects, then you would need to say, yes, we have changes. If it is all the same projects and you're just removing some, so you already have everything else that you need, like that related documents, the supporting documentation has been uploaded, you can just say resubmit, and include all the things that were in there and just remove anything that has been reimbursed, if all the other projects are the same.
Julia, the other question in the chat box was the total allocation amount on the old liquidation request is not the same as the allocation amount on the new liquidation request. Should they be the same?
They should be, and it may be that, let me see. I have to ask off the top of my head if the old one may have been off. We noticed a few as we were going in where there were just a few where the allocations were not correct. So that may be the case, that it was just corrected, hopefully corrected. Yeah.
It could also be if people have released, Julia. So let us check into that. I've got it pulled up right now. And when we send out the webinar, we can just double check and we'll put a sentence into that email.
Requested extension deadline. Yes. So the extension deadline, someone asked, does this need to be the date we need the extension to get the project done? So yes, we mentioned earlier that projects may be approved for that additional 14 months, which would get us to, I guess it's not 14 months now, but March of 2026. But Ed has really encouraged LEAs to consider what is a realistic timeline to get these activities done. And so, just because it could be extended, we don't want to do that unless it absolutely has to be. So just considering what is the timeline that you need, not extending just for the sake of extending, I guess is another way to say that. But yes, that would just be, when do you plan to have this project done by?
Catherine, I see you have your hand raised. You can go ahead and unmute.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
My question is, when we talk about the realistic date or timeline for us to put on our new request application, we are waiting on 2 buses that are supposed to be in here mid-May. What's a realistic date for me to put on that?
I would recommend July 1 or July 30th, Catherine. I would think you would need time to ensure, you do a quality check and all of that on them and make sure. So, I think if you wanted to put July to pad your time, unfortunately, if they don't come in on time, you would have to file another potential extension. So I would pad it by at least 30 days at minimal to give yourself time to work with your accounting, bookkeeping, and get everything paid and processed. But I would assume 30 days pad would be appropriate.
I just wasn't sure as to how long it would take the whole approval process from Ed before
when they originally launched this, they committed to doing it within a week.
Okay.
I know that there are 48 other states that are going to be reapplying on based on their district's behalf. And so I think realistically, we should give them probably 2 weeks or so to review.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you, Catherine.
Hey, Joshua.
Hey, good morning. Have a question about the vendor line specifically. So like we got, for instance, our high dosage tutoring program, there are about 4 different vendors that are associated with that, different purchase orders. Do you want us to lump those together and list one high dosage tutoring line, or do we need 4 high dosage tutoring lines, one with each vendor?
I would recommend 4 different lines.
Okay.
US Ed specified that they want to see the vendor's name.
Okay.
And so I would ensure that you list a vendor's name for each of them. But great question. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks.
Mhm.
We have another question in the chat box. Does the extension deadline need to include enough time to receive reimbursement? We liquidated our funds on March 14th, but I don't think the reimbursement request was made by March 28th.
So as that is a great question. I would recommend, again, trying to pad it by 30 days or so. I do think, like, realistically, as soon as we get your districts approved, we would be able to start right away reimbursing. And so I think it depends on how cumbersome or how many requests you have for your district. I think it's going to depend on what the items are and if US Ed has any questions. And then they can and will just approve certain sections or certain projects. So I do think 30 days. Some of you may want to do 60. Those are appropriate periods. I think what they do not want to see is everybody put March 28th, 2026. And they said they just don't feel like that's realistic, that everybody's going to need that much time to draw down these funds. And so I think 30 to 60 days seems a reasonable time frame to pad some of these requests, but I would caution you in trying to spread it out to the end of the liquidation period, which is that March 2026 date.
Yes, Michelle, go ahead and unmute.
Okay, I just found out because I was the one that just asked that question. But I did find out that we did a reimbursement request prior to March 28th, but because it's ARP Homeless, we still need to do the extension. Is that correct?
I don't, Debbie would be the one to answer. I don't know if any of the ARP homeless got approved before the March 28th deadline. To my knowledge, there was not any approved.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
So,
Okay.
Michelle, let us check on that for you. It was my understanding when we had worked with the CFO that we had not paid out any of the ARP homeless reimbursements, but we can verify that. Do you mind to share what district you're with so I
Sure.
can follow up?
I'm with Kingsport City Schools. I
Okay.
noticed there's another Michelle Wilder on here, except she has 2 L's in her name. I thought that was interesting. So
Thank you. And we'll follow up with you once we verify that. Thanks.
okay, thank you.
Okay, so I see a comment and a question. Was there a concern about making sure all documentation for the original submission being maintained in ePlan? And we made a decision as a team that we wanted this to be as least burdensome as possible. And so we made the decision, as long as you've provided us that documentation in the original submission, then we already have it, and there's no sense in folks having to re-upload stuff or refill out things. We don't have any concerns about maintaining the documentation in ePlan. If US Ed requires anything, we have the ability to download it and send it into them. So we feel like that is much cleaner, easier to track, and a little bit more consistent for us as we work with the 43 districts impacted, as well as with our federal partners. So Julia and Vanessa, I'm not seeing any other questions or any other hands up. I think if y'all are cool. Oh, we have submitted. Yeah, I think it's Robin. Hey, Robin.
Hey, I was just frantically trying to type my question, so
No
then I was like,
worries.
oh, nope, let me just put my hand up. Okay, so because of this delay, we had contracts with folks who are doing PD with our staff, to build capacity with our staff. So we won't be able, by the time I submit anything, resubmit anything for the extension, we're going to be at the end of the school year, which is going to take us into a new fiscal year, which would mean a new purchase order, a new contract, which then would not fall under having it obligated by September 30th of 2024. So am I correct in thinking that because of what ours originally was for, that this is probably not going to work for us and we would just need to release our funds, which ours is a very small amount, so.
So let's unpack a little bit your question. So you mentioned that you have a contract. Is it a multi-year contract or a one-year contract?
It was a 1-year contract. Well, 2 out of 3. There's 3 different individuals we had contracts with. The third individual, their contract ended with a professional development being done in July with our staff. So that was going to fall into the next fiscal year, obviously. The other 2 contracts were to provide this ongoing support to specifically to our math teachers, for this school year. So once we got this guidance, we just had to halt where we were.
So I think it's the district's discretion. If it's a small amount of money, then our team can definitely work with you to see if you have other options and things that maybe were obligated by 9/30 using ESSA funds or another funding source, and that we could potentially submit on your behalf to free up this money in another funding source so you can utilize that contract. If you feel like they are allowable, and they have that tie to COVID and they can answer the new questions that Julia highlighted a little bit earlier, I do think potentially you could, allow those people to work out their contract and then submit for reimbursement, for approval for an extension to liquidate again. I think you've got a couple options depending on the amount. I don't think it's definitely like a line drawn in the sand that you have to revert the funds. I do think we can definitely think through a couple different scenarios based on the amount, based on the services, and if you all want to continue or if you've kind of stopped, and how we might be able to move some expenses around, get approval from Ed, and then allow you to liquidate, freeing up another funding source.
Okay.
Yep. So we can schedule a call if that would be helpful, since there are a few caveats in there that we probably want to unpack.
Right. Okay. Well,
Yep.
I'll follow up locally and then follow up with you if I need to. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. Guys, we do appreciate you all joining. Julia and Vanessa will be sending out the link. Sorry about the confusion earlier. We have recorded this webinar, and so we will be providing that recording to you all. We will be hosting office hours tomorrow. Julia and I will be partnering on those to talk through any questions that you have. Again, thank you for your partnership as we navigate this uncharted territory, as we will continue to partner with you as well as the U.S. Department of Education to ensure that we are able to resubmit these extensions for liquidation. Thanks, guys.